What we do know is this, Simon. At 1:30 today, Thomas Tuchel will speak to the media. So, to an extent, it's guesswork as to what came out of the meeting yesterday. But what I can do is tell you what I have discovered in the course of between about 9:30 and 10 this morning. Following the meeting, the relationship between Chelsea and Lukaku himself is said to be going in the right direction. We have been told that we can assume there's been an apology from Lukaku.
Yep.
As far as I know, we understand he's now in contention, Lukaku, to be in the squad for tomorrow night's Carabao Cup match against Tottenham. And this is the interesting bit. We understand that it can't be ruled out that Lukaku hasn't been fined or that he isn't set to be fined for his actions.
Right.
So he might yet be hit in the pocket if he hasn't been already. Thomas Tuchel, as I say, will speak to the media at 1:30 today.
Yep.
Trust in football, Simon. Is it difficult to achieve it? Does it even exist?
To a point, but it's also easily lost because football has this innate lacking of respect that exists in its framework from whether it's from managers to chairman, from players to managers, players full stop, agents, whichever part of the window that we look at sport in, there is an element of respect that needs, whether it's referees being called out left, right, centre by everybody, whether it's the way that people engage with one, whether it's the way the fans sing songs about one another.
Yeah.
The whole culture isn't underscored by respect. Then you've got discipline and you've got trust. Trust is something that can be earned but quickly lost. So it's a difficult one because it's a very self-serving, duplicitous sport where people are always looking for an excuse, always looking to blame other people, always looking for the reasons why they're not accountable. You can't criticise anybody because if you do, then you're taking away, certain aspects of their character rather than building that up. Praise is the only thing that can happen. And if anybody dare criticise somebody, then it's an absolute outrage. So all of those things don't breed an environment where you particularly trust somebody, do you?
Right.
And you see managers constantly, remarking about things behind their owner's back or back-channeling through the media, or you see players talking out of turn about their manager, or you see managers falling out with people that work for them. So the whole culture of football isn't really built upon a foundation of trust.
When you owned Palace, can I ask you this honestly?
Yeah.
Did you honestly trust anyone?
It's a very challenging sport to be in because the very people that you should be able to trust are often the ones that do you in, the ones that you want to support, the ones that you want to back.
Is that what happened with you?
Well, no, not really, because I had experiences both good and bad. There were people that were well worthy of my trust and returned it to me in spades, and there were people that didn't merit any of my trust, and that's my judgment, my fault, my mistake. If you trust somebody that's not worthy of your trust, then more fool you. Right? You've got to pick the people that you can back and support. The thing for me is that if you're going to put a guy in charge, you give him the reins, you let him run, and ultimately you hope for him to be successful and you give him as much support. The challenge for me was that often with football people, they're not what you think they are. They're not these captains of industry. They're not these great Churchillian speech givers that have great backbone. They're not these people. You think they are, but they're actually not. And that's not me just taking a negative experience at Palace at times, because there were lots of good things. There were lots of good people that I encountered. And when I see a leader, when I hear people that have got the courage of their convictions, that have the courage of their convictions to say something, I admire them for it. When I listen to people like Souness or Keane or even Mika Richards at times that go, I'm going to go in all in this, I'm going to have something to say and I'm going to own it. Now we move on to Romelu Lukaku. Lukaku, if he's apologised, what's he apologising for? Does he believe what he said? Because if he believes what he said, then what's he apologising for? Or is he apologising because it's been an inappropriate use of a medium?
Well, it was an unauthorised interview.
Well,
so maybe he's apologising for giving it.
Okay, but we have to be clear on the guidelines as to Chelsea's guidelines, because I don't know what their policy is. Are players told that they cannot speak to any media outlet without Chelsea's prior consent? Because I would imagine that Romelu Lukaku, as a striker that was courted by Chelsea, that was £100 million spent on him, probably isn't bound by absolute silence.
Well, were your players at Palace bound?
They were not allowed to speak out in detriment to the club. So if they said anything that was ultimately bringing the club into disrepute, and that's debatable what disrepute looks like, but I think it looks like criticism, right? Then they find themselves in a consequence and a bind. So I would suspect that there's no different for Chelsea, because Chelsea are quite particular about how they want their image to be represented.
Of course.
But you know, if you're apologising because you've been caught, it's not the same as apologising because you know that you're wrong. So the apology is one thing, and Graham Souness, and I keep referencing Graham because I happen to like a lot of the things he says, talked about the need to apologise. But an apology is one thing if you believe that you're wrong and that you understand the reasons why you're wrong. I think Romelu Lukaku has been caught. I think he's been embarrassed. I think he's made himself look like a complete and utter, well, here's a different word, buffoon.
Yeah.
And as a consequence of that, he needs to manage the situation. So with that in mind, there was always going to be a remedy, wasn't there? Does he deserve to get fined? One thing football players understand, like most of us do, is when it hits your pocket.
Yeah.
Because it's all about money. Let's be clear.
Would you fine him?
Oh, damn right I would, yeah. Because that's the consequence.
You would fine him?
Of course I would.
It's my understanding it can't be ruled out that Lukaku hasn't been fined or isn't set to be fined.
And I'd want him to be grateful for the fine too. I'd want him to be accepting of the fine. I'd want him to be accepting of it because I'd want him to understand that I haven't fined him because I want to take money away from him. I fined him because there's a consequence to your behaviour.
Yeah.
And that consequence isn't just being taken out of a side, which provides a conundrum for the manager. The consequence of your behaviour is it actually really does impact you. Half a bar out of your salary, which is probably what he's on, 250 grand a week for a couple of weeks, is a consequence. Nobody likes that. They don't want it. And ultimately...
You fine him 250 grand?
Well, if you find what people, their wages, you find people, normally if someone breaches discipline, you find them a proportion of their weekly wage. And there is an optimum level and a minimum level. His position...
You see, you have to think... Sorry to
he's
jump
brought
in.
the club into disrepute.
But he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing.
You've got to also
A
understand...
Sky Italia crew pitch up at his house over here in England.
Yeah.
Lights, cameras, sound, actioned a lot. They're sitting down to have a cup of tea with
But
him.
there's every single one of us, right, has got themselves in a situation where they believe their own hype. They're carried away on an element of their own importance. And every now and again, you lose sight of what you're actually saying. So I think whilst he's got control of his mouth, he can do the interview, he's still got control of his mouth. He said what he meant, by the way, at that particular time, but there is an element of knowing when to speak and when to be quiet, and if you don't, then you're a fool, right? And he's thrown out a set of observations. One was a love letter to Milan. Let's be clear about underlying narratives that build up behind players. He didn't want to leave Inter Milan. This big idea that he was clamouring at the bit to come to Chelsea, yes, he'd go back to Chelsea to prove a point because he wasn't successful their first time round. But if Conte was still in situ, and Conte would have still been in situ at Inter Milan, if Inter Milan hadn't told Conte they're going to sell players to meet the financial obligations they've got. So when we talk about him coming back to Chelsea as this great big love letter back to Chelsea...
Oh, no, sure.
He didn't want to come back there.
But it was the lens that Chelsea went to get him.
Well,
that's what he's forgotten about.
But that's their business. It's not his business.
Yeah.
What he's got to do...
Chelsea got a custard pie when they offered money plus Marco Alonso. They didn't want that. All Inter wanted was, there's the price.
Fine, but we're not talking about Inter. We're talking about Romelu Lukaku, and we're talking about his relationship with Chelsea and how we should respect it. Players don't respect anything besides people that say what they mean and mean what they say. And Tuchel has got to get into the ribs of Romelu Lukaku. And probably someone said something that's quite right as well. Every player is an individual, and you've got to treat them with a degree of individuality at the same time as ensure that the collective is managed. So with Cantona, I remember listening to Steve Bruce talk to me about how Alex Ferguson handled Cantona because he was the exception that always produced. But he was a minefield of problems for Ferguson. But he treated him like an individual, even to the point where a player can jump in a crowd, kick a fan in the face, and still be held in such high regard by the manager. Lukaku probably needs an arm around him, so that's got to be part of Tuchel's locker to get the best out of Lukaku. But as far as Lukaku's behaviour, he's an idiot. He's said something idiotic. He's been made to look stupid, and the manager will deal with it. And I expect him to come back into the fold. I've always expected that to be the case.
We shall hear what Thomas has got to say on that meeting, and what now for Lukaku. You'll hear that around 1:30.
Jim White and Simon Jordan, Monday to Thursday morning, 10 till 1. On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app, and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.